Okay, so I thought we would do two videos for each profile. One video going through the voice attack commands within the voice attack itself here, basically on the screen, and showing the various commands in the profile, and then a second video showing you the profile operating inside DCS in the Hornet module. So first thing we want to do here is to import the profiles. So we go to import DCS Hornet profile, open the warning, select yes, again back to the cross with the import profile and the Vaicom profile, open, same warning, yes, and we're done. So let's look at the commands in the Vaicom Pro Hornet profile and the additions in there. If I click in the box, I bring up the various sections or the groups I've put these into. The radio control is standard. The push to talk you will need to configure as you would a standard Vaicom profile for whatever buttons you're using for your various push to talks. The kneeboard I'll come back to. Keyword collections is standard. Extension packs is standard. Configuration is standard, all standard Vaicom stuff. The additional three that I have here is a mute command, which is disabled, which simply will mute voice attack. We have a module select command, which I'll come back to, and we have this Hollywood command. This is what you'll see when you first open it, and you'll see Hollywood disabled, unable to change profile. You double click on the unable to change profile, get this warning, say OK, and you're then able to select the profile. We want to go from the Vaicom profile to the DCS Hornet profile, so we simply select DCS Hornet, we OK, OK, and it's now selected. So by saying Hollywood, this will shift the Vaicom profile to the standalone DCS Hornet profile. Next thing, go to options, include command from other profile, click on the boxes, click on the add, include from other profile, and we're going to include the DCS Hornet. OK, OK, OK. And that's the Hollywood command sorted. The module select command is simply a command you can use if you find yourself in a module and you have the wrong module in voice attack configured. You can use the module select command. All this is a series of if statements, which simply looks at the output from the exposed variable, the Vaicom player data current module name. Depending on what that returns, it will tell you the aircraft selected, and it will then switch to the appropriate profiles. If you had these profiles existing, which you probably won't, but if you had your setup that way, that's what this command does. If we now go back to the kneeboard commands, again these are all voice disabled. What these would do if they were enabled is to select the appropriate tab when you're in the dynamic kneeboard, and you can see it opens, each of them opens a various tab. The only two that are actually active when you get the profile is the tab tab down or back and the tab up or forward, and these will simply select the next or the previous tab. The reason these are disabled is that there's other commands now within the DCS profile which we'll come to, which sort of supersede these. However, I've just left them in because you may want to use them depending on your configuration or setup later, but they aren't needed in the profiles as it stands. So if we now go to the DCS command, the standalone DCS Hornet profile, and if I get voice attack to listen, I say Hollywood, Hollywood,
Hollywood, disabled.
And you can see I've now switched to the Hornet, DCS Hornet command, which is appended to the Vaicom Pro Hornet profile. If we open this up, what we're looking for here is the voice attack, and we go to the Hollywood. We have the same sort of setup. I double click, I say OK, and this time I want to select the Vaicom Pro Hornet, and we're done here. So that will now work. For instance, if I say Hollywood, Hollywood,
Hollywood, enabled.
And I switch to the Vaicom profile, Hollywood,
Hollywood, disabled.
And I go back to the DCS Hornet profile. Okay, discontinue. That simply stops all running DCS voice attack commands. This is in case you get a command that's maybe looping all the time or loses its variable or whatever, and sort of locks voice attack up. Discontinue will stop the running commands. I very rarely have to use this. Theta region is more a troubleshooting command. It uses the Vaicom exposed variables to tell me what theta Vaicom thinks it's in, and it will then tell me what that theta is. I use a similar sort of thing when doing the reset, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so going from the top again here, we have the airfield TACANs. These are all the TACAN commands for all the air bases I've found that have TACAN stations within the Caucasus, Gulf, Nevada, and Syrian maps. Each of them will operate if you call them, but won't actually be invoked unless you are in the correct region or map, and that's just simply done with a text compare command, where you have to be in the correct map for the actual command to execute. It will show on the voice attack window that it's been activated, but it won't actually execute unless it's in the correct map. Autopilot is simply the steer command. This is to set the steer point in the autopilot, and it's a 3-digit command. So I would say steer 320, steer 180, whatever, and that will place in that heading into into the UFC to operate on the MPCD, and then the aircraft will steer to that heading. Cockpit commands are all fairly straightforward. They're more or less just operating single keystrokes. How much of these are applicable and what they are should be fairly straightforward. The shooter is the equivalent of the salute command. Shooter, launcher, salute will operate any of them, and the same with engage the shuttle. Doorbell is simply my rather warped sense of humour. This is the emergency jettison command. So if you wanted to, you can change that. When I say to instead of doorbell, you can change it to emergency jettison or something like that. I just use doorbell because I've heard that if you push that button in the aircraft and expend all the stores, you will be in front of the admiral. Feet wet and feet dry are two commands to simply configure the anti-skid and the hook bypass in the correct configuration for landing or taking off from either the carrier, feet wet, or an airfield, feet dry. Relinquish stores asks you for is a series of hints will come up through through sort of spoken commands. It will say select station, and then you have to specify the station, and then it goes through a series of if statements to work out exactly what it's got to jettison. Wings fold and wings spread I think are fairly straightforward. Radar altitude and pressure altitude is the altimeter. You may want to change these to altimeter, to barometric altimeter and radar altimeter. I'm just using pressure altitude, radar altitude. That's cockpit. Displays are for pushing the buttons on the MFDs, the left and right MFDs, and the AMPCD. The MPCD, of course, is the mid-display, and the left and right are the MFDs. How this works is I have each of these screens, which are 2 rows and 2 columns, all of them being 5 buttons long. The 2 rows are top and bottom, the 2 columns are left and right. The numbering for the top and bottom is left to right. The numbering on the left and right are top to bottom. So how this would work is I would say left display. I would wait a second, and then I'm then free to select these buttons. I could say T1, R5, L2, etc. one after the other like that. If I then wanted to change display, I simply then say the new display. For instance, I say mid display, wait a second, and then again I can say L2, R3, B4, etc. And the buttons would then be pressed on the mid display as opposed to the left display previously. DX button commands are all blank at the moment and all voice disabled, so essentially they don't operate. I use these because I have a WinWing throttle, and as I don't like the WinWing software, I'm using voice attack to send appropriate keystrokes to the to DCS to operate these functions. The reason I do this is I have more latitude by using voice attack, in as much as if I simply map a DX button from the throttle directly to the game, it only operates one function. With these I can operate various modes. I can more of which in a minute. I can use a shift command. I can use various states where these buttons will do different things depending on the status, specifically the landing gear up or the landing gear down. So essentially going this way just gives me more flexibility, but I need to run voice attack, so I have something running in the background which will probably slow it down slightly more. But if you're using voice attack enemy for voice commands, why not configure these this way? You may want to use some of these. You would just simply have to configure them. They're ready to go as is, because I actually have these mapped to DX buttons in my own personal profile. Function keys are simply the F keys, 1 to 12. I just call them fun keys. Call them what you want. Rename them what you want. So if I say fun 1, it will push me into the cockpit. If I say fun 10, it will transfer me to the map. If I say fun 2, it will give me an outside view. Just operating the function keys. Very straightforward. Game config is common commands that are used across quite a lot of the modules to operate some of the more common commands, and some of the additional whistles and bells that you have to look at various things in the module. For instance, the controls indicator will show you the inputs to the module for the stick, the rudder, throttle, etc. Frame counter will bring up the frame counter in the top left, showing you your frame rate. Labels. Pause is simply the pause command. Suspend is the active pause. Stick hides a stick. SRS and SRS overlay are for commands. If you're using SRS, you might not, so you can enable or disable as you like. Screenshot simply hits the print screen button. Flashlight does what it says, it toggles the flashlight. Briefing window will bring up the briefing window. So, game modes. These are really based on what target gives you. Joystick Gremlin and a few of the others can do similar things. You have a shift command, which will put you into a shifted state, which means your button can do something else. And then you have a mode command. I have 3 modes in here. In target they are up, middle and down. I'm using air for up, ground for down, and nav for middle. So you can go into each of these modes, and then you also would have a shift, and if you like a non-shifted state, so you could have a shift true and a shift false for each of these states. So that would essentially mean you could have one button giving you up to 6 commands should you choose. You can either configure these through another piece of hardware, through a DX button, or a keystroke, or alternatively you can actually just shout them up in the game. You could say gear down, and you could say air, ground, shift false, shift true, and that would shift all the variables in voice attack to that state. The only 2 I recommend that you do configure is the gear up and the gear down, because quite a few of the commands in the profile operate dependent on the gear state. For instance, the autopilot, I believe, only operates with the gear up. The nose wheel steering, for instance, will only operate with the gear down. So there's a few things like that. And you would simply bind these to whatever you use in the game for the gear, using either a DX button through here, or through a particular keystroke, the keystroke in the game, etc. If that's what you invoke, so as voice attack can be synced to know when you have the gear raised and the gear lowered. HUD, again straightforward. Display, glass or HUD will operate any of them, and you have a clutter, declutter, a cage and uncage. IFEI is the engine display on the lower left, and with that you can reset the timer, start and stop the timer through these two commands here, and the third one is to set the bingo state. So you would call that up by saying bingo advisory. It will come up and ask you state quantity, and you simply give it the number in pounds. So you would say 3,000, and it would set the bingo quantity to £3,000. It will then track that. If you say 5,000 from 3,000, it will then track up to 5,000. If you say 2,000, it will track down to 2,000. Interactive kneeboard. I'll come back to that because we want to cover the kneeboard first, I think. Keyboard tracker is just a series of keyboard states that voice attack will look at, and these are simply to try and keep the voice attack variables in sync with what's happening in the game. Generally I'm using keystrokes for all of them. If you're using DX buttons, you would configure them to whatever your DX button state was. The only one that's really used, that I use a lot, is the keyboard advance and retreat tracker. This simply means that if I page up or page down through the kneeboard pages using the brackets on the keyboard, voice attack will see these commands being these buttons being pushed on the keyboard, and will advance or retreat the tracking variable that's in here, that's in this profile, so as it keeps its own internal tracker correct, so as when you call something else within voice attack, it will still be at the correct page and should then go to the correct page you call within voice attack. Kneeboard. Mainly for the Caucasus, a little bit for Nevada. If I call up the kneeboard, I can call it up by saying page 1 up to page 61 in the Hornet profile. That will just that will tell it to go to a selected page, or I can call up the charts separately. For instance, I can call Batumi charts, and the kneeboard should page to Batumi charts. If I call Anapa charts, it will then go to the Anapa charts. The apply user delta is a command for if you've got additional sheets in your profile and you want to add them to sync it, you would use this command. It's essentially, though, it's not used in the profile as it stands. The auto sync is what actually syncs the kneeboard to the kneeboard in the game. At the moment, it is set up with no additional sheets, no user additional sheets added. If you add sheets to this, you will have to change these numbers. The maximum value of the number of sheets in the kneeboard, the mid value, and the number of pages that the kneeboard has to advance to get to the schematic map, which is what is selected as page 1. The reason for that is that all user charts are placed between the map and the schematic map. By using the schematic map in the Caucasus as page 1, it will always be page 1. The reason I've got median and integer in here is so as I can enable the kneeboard to page backwards as well as page forward. So rather than having to page forward 58 pages and page back 58 pages, it will either page back up to 29 or page forward up to 29 pages, so it makes the kneeboard operate a bit quicker. And as you can see, depending on the map I have, these numbers change quite dramatically. For the Caucasus and Nevada, they're quite big. For the Gulf and the Syria, they're tiny, negligible. And you'll see that operating in the when we go into the actual module to demonstrate it. Interactive kneeboard is Hollywood's dynamic kneeboard, and I'm calling it dynamic data. If I say dynamic data, I will go to the interactive kneeboard page. If I call up any of these, if I say AWACS data, I say Crystal Palace data, JTAC data, that will call up the dynamic data, so it will page to the interactive kneeboard, and it will then go to the appropriate tab. And they're all called data with the exception of notes, because I thought notes data sounds a bit odd, so I just called it dynamic notes. There's also a command in here called dynamic sync. This is just simply a synchronization command in case the kneeboard decides to jump to the interactive kneeboard. If it does this and it's not where the kneeboard has been called for, you can say dynamic sync, and that will synchronize the variables for the kneeboard and voice attack to the correct page for the interactive kneeboard, and you should be good to go again. Keyboard tracker recovered, kneeboard recovered, radio, pretty straightforward. You can say radio 1 or radio or com, the number and then a channel. So I can say, for instance, radio 1 channel 6 or radio 2 channel 22, and the it will shift the channels in the radio channels on the UFC to the correct channel. If I just simply want to bring up the radio itself just to look at it, or to give it a frequency, I can say radio 1 select or com 1 select or radio 2 select. If, for instance, I was wanting to put in a frequency, I would say, for instance, radio 1 select. When the radio came up on the UFC, I would then say frequency, followed by a 3 to 5 digit number. The first 3 digits are assumed to be integers or whole numbers, and the 4th and 5th numbers are decimals. If you want to just simply put in a integer number, for instance, supposing the actual frequency is 25000, you would just say 250, and the decimal zeros will be put in by default. If it was 250.5 or 250 decimal 5, you would say 2505. If it was 250 decimal 55, you would say 25055. But any numbers that you don't mention on here will be assumed to be 0. So if in the Caucasus especially, there are not many radio stations, there are not many air bases that I can recall that actually use numbers after the decimal. So you just simply call the 3-digit number to tune the airbase for the particular frequency you're wanting. Resets, just a whole bunch of resets to reset variables. The only ones that are important is marine reset, shore reset, which are the commands you would use at the beginning when you first jump into the module. The difference between marine reset and shore reset is shore reset will assume that the anti-skid and hook bypass are set up for an airfield. Marine reset will assume that the hook bypass and anti-skid are set up for the carrier. The only other reset that I use occasionally would be the if I can find it, the kneeboard reset. Where are we here? Reset charts kneeboard, which will reset the kneeboard to the schematic map. But an alternative would be to simply use the interactive dynamic sync command by going to the interactive kneeboard page, and then just saying dynamic sync would do exactly the same thing. It would set the voice attack tracking variable to the correct page within the game, so voice attack would know where the kneeboard is. Startup and shutdown, it's pretty straightforward. For invoking the auto start and stop sequence, these are all disabled at the moment. You'd have to configure them to either a DX button or a key press if you wanted them to operate. At the moment these are disabled. Canopy lower, canopy raise, eject, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and the parking brake set and release. I think self-explanatory. Track IR you'll need to configure. At the moment it's set up for a right alt up key, which is my personal command within track IR to center track IR, and similarly my freeze command is right alt down. It's a down arrow command. If yours are different, you can simply reconfigure them by double pushing on them and then putting in the correct keystrokes that are used for it. These are commands I use a lot. UFC is the upfront controller, all straightforward. The enter button, the enter numbers here, and the enter asterisk is for entering digits into the UFC. Unfortunately, the wildcard command, the enter star, will only operate correctly if you give it more than one digit. In other words, it has to be 2 digits you have to put in here for it to work. So in order to put in single digits, if you wanted to, I've got these as well. So if I say enter 5, it will operate this. If I say enter 15, this command would be operated. And that would simply push the buttons 15 or whatever you want. You know, you can put in a string of numbers, and they will put in. The assert ratify is the enter key. You wonder why I'm calling it assert or ratify. It's simply because Vaicom uses both confirm and affirm or affirm as commands, and we'll grab these commands first if you say them, and I'm already using the enter to put digits into the keypad. Options are the OBC commands, the option buttons. So you would say option 1, option 2, etc. TACAN and the ILS, you can put in up to 98, up to channel 98, channel 99 for the TACAN. So if I say TACAN channel 56, it will put TACAN channel 56 into the UFC. If I say ILS 43, for instance, it will put ILS channel 43 into the UFC. UHF and VHF tower frequencies, very similar to the TACAN, just a bunch of preset frequencies to call up the various air bases, including Crystal Palace. And I have these commands for both UHF and for VHF. Although they are a little redundant because you can simply call them up via Vaicom directly, but should you choose, you can use these commands to tune them instead. And the voice attack commands we've already been over, and that's it. So the next video I'll make will be in the actual module itself, showing you some of these commands operating and what you need to do to get the profile running. Okay, that's it.